Welcome back, everyone. I hope all of you had a good lunch. Well, now we will be proceeding towards our first technical session of this conference. The theme of this session would be towards a more holistic and multidisciplinary education and creating optimal learning environment. The same would be moderated by Dr. Reena Gupta, Assistant Professor in the University School of Information, Communication and Technology. Handing over to Dr. Gupta.
Thank you, Namrata. A very good afternoon to all the dignitaries, honorable vice chancellors, and distinguished guests. On behalf of the AIU and Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University, it's an honor to welcome you all to the first technical session on Implementation Strategies of National Education Policy 2020 towards a more holistic and multidisciplinary education and creating optimal learning environment. India has established itself as a Vishwaguru since ancient times. At that time, our education was holistic and multidisciplinary. The new Education Policy 2020 has again emphasized on bringing back the multidisciplinary and holistic education. So, in this session, we deliberate on the strategies to implement National Education Policy 2020 in India with special reference to multidisciplinary and holistic education. It is my privilege and pleasure to share that the chairperson of this session is Professor M. Jagadesh Kumar, Vice Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Professor Kumar received 2013 Award for Excellence in Teaching from IIT Delhi. He is on the editorial board in several international journals, including scientific reports from the publishers of Nature. He is the editor of IEEE Journal of the Electron Devices Society and editor-in-chief of IETE Technical Review. He has also been awarded the 29th IETE Ramlal Vadha Gold Medal for distinguished contribution in the field of semiconductor device design and modeling. He also received the first ever ISA VSI Technomentor Award given by the India Electronics and Semiconductor Association. He is the chairman of governing body of National Council of Science Museums, Ministry of Culture, Government of India. Sir, I extend a very warm welcome to you. Our esteemed speakers for the session are Professor M. Upadhyay, Dr. Dept, and Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu. Our first speaker, Professor M. Upadhyay, is the Vice Chancellor of Dr. Babashaeb Ambedkar University, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. She is the recipient of Shri Manbhai Bhatt Pratishthit Nagrik Samman. She has also received Award of Honor and the Best Vice Chancellor Award for her work in the field of open and distance learning. She has been conferred with the Lifetime Achievement Award by AIPC for exemplary contribution in the field of art and education. Ma'am, I welcome you. Our next speaker, Dr. Dept, is an Executive Director of the Center for Excellence in Transformative Teaching and Learning at the University of Central Oklahoma. He is the Chief Architect of UCO Student Transformative Learning Record. Dr. Dept's background includes faculty professional development work for more than 25 years in higher education. Sir, I welcome you. Our last speaker, Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu, formerly OSD, Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education, erstwhile Ministry of Human Resource Development, has been the Secretary of the Committee to Draft National Education Policy. She was the Nodal Officer of the flagship Government of India scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. During her tenure, 95 centers were approved. Annual refresher program in teaching and faculty induction programs were implemented, and over 5 lakh faculties were trained. Ma'am, I welcome you. Now, I request the chairperson, Professor M. Jagadesh Kumar, to kindly take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. My dear experts who are going to speak in this important session and all the delegates, it gives me immense pleasure in extending my warm welcome to all of you. As already been informed, we have 3 eminent speakers, Professor Ami Upadhyay, Dr. Jeffy King, and Dr. Shakila, Shamsu, all of whom have been very deeply associated with higher education. And today's topic is a very important topic, especially in the context of the national education policy unveiled by India. In this session, we are going to listen to these three eminent experts on holistic and multidisciplinary education and creating the optimal learning environment for the students to be creative and innovative. So our session is from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m., 90 minutes. Let us divide our time between presentations and discussions with the participants of this webinar. So roughly, may I request each speaker to speak for about 12 to 15 minutes. So that will take about 40 to 45 minutes of our time. And the remaining time we can use for answering the queries and the suggestions that are expected to come from the audience who are part of this webinar. So with those brief comments, let's get on to the job. So the host may please mute.
पता नहीं कि यार सारा कुछ हम लोग को ही करना है, मेहनत है, पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट हम भेजेंगे कोई मांग।
Right. I think it's better that the host mutes everybody, and please go to the Zoom controls, and you have a set. You can set there that the participants cannot unmute themselves. So you please set that so that accidentally nobody unmutes and interferes with the webinar. So let me first invite Professor Ami Upadhyay, who is Vice Chancellor Dr. Babashaeb Ambedkar Open University, to deliver her presentation.
Namaskar. Honorable President, AIU, Professor Tej Pratap Singh ji, Honorable Secretary General AIU, dear Dr. Pankaj Mittal ji, Vice Chancellor Guru Govind Indraprastha University, the Session Chair, Honorable Vice Chancellor JNU, Professor M. Jagadesh Kumar, my co-panelists, co-speakers. It's a matter of great pleasure and privilege to speak something about which is very close to your heart. And yes, today I'm going to say something, share my views on multidisciplinary and holistic education. Let me introduce myself a little bit. That I've studied in a school. I had my schooling from Dakshinamurti School, which was founded by Gijubai Badeka, who is known across nation as Muchali Ma, in Gujarat, with very strong foundation in very different education system with Montessori ideology. So I've been, I have studied there. My mother worked with that institute for pretty 27 years. So I've been brought up in that environment. And I had my graduation in the same institute where Mahatma Gandhi studied. So somewhere the education, the concept of education is comparatively, it's very different and comparatively very close to this holistic and multidisciplinary education that what National Education Policy 2020 talks about. I'm very happy with the title. It talks about towards a more holistic and multidisciplinary education and creating optimal learning environment. So it says a more holistic. So very optimistically, we agree on a common platform. It sounds here that there is holistic and multidisciplinary education. We need a little bit more. And let us start with that positive note that yes, it is there. Before I move further, let us think about the words and phrases in the title. being from Open University, I very strongly approve and recommend open learning, because education does not come from one direction, it comes from all the directions. And that's why our Upanishad, Indian Upanishad also says that let knowledge come from all the sides. I keep my windows and doors open. I think when we talk about holistic and multidisciplinary education, it is somewhat like that only. Holistic means whole and complete. What are we talking when we talk about complete and whole? There are two sides of this, holistic or complete. Holistic, again, it is about the knowledge. When we talk about knowledge, the knowledge as a whole. Second, an individual as a whole. The individual is sum total of so many factors, aspects, perspectives of personality. And that becomes one complete. So when we think about catering education, do we really consider all the aspects of that individual? I'm not talking much on national education policy, because Dr. Shakila ji is there, who has worked for complete 5 years for this policy, and she would be focusing more on that. I would be more focusing on the type of education that we are going to discuss about. When we talk about multidisciplinary, it includes about all the discipline, more than one discipline, maybe trans, multi, intra. It is the extension of all these things. When we talk about learning environment, you see the focus is on learning environment, optimal learning environment. When we use word learning, automatically the education becomes student-centric instead of teacher-centric. Unfortunately, whether we agree or not, but for decades, if we look at today on national education policy, honestly, if we look at our education system, most of the time, education system has been more teacher-centric. So the first time, learning environment. So focus shifts from teacher to the student, how he learns. When we talk about what exactly learning means something, act or experience of learning. It talks about how does one experience while learning, while certain act of getting knowledge or skill. When we talk about outcome of learning, in one or the other way, some modification in the behavioral perspective. So when we look at the recent education system, not national education policy, that what education it talks about. But if we look at major education getting placed today, it was more teacher-centric and monotonous. Lesser focus was on experience of an individual and expected modification in the behavior, thought process of an individual. So it talks about that. The beautiful word is optimal. Optimal means most desirable, most successful. Most desirable from which perspective? Most successful from which perspective? When there is a class of maybe 20 students, 40 students, 60 students, are they the same? Today I'm reminded of a story that I read years back, and even I taught in Shiv Khera's book, You Can Win or Living by Honor. There he takes an anecdote where the animals are to be educated, where the squirrel has to learn swimming and a fish has to learn how to climb a tree. Somewhere we have been doing it. Every child is special. Every child has some very special ability. When we focus a lot on only mathematics, science, or maybe social studies, many other sides of his or her individual personality are ignored. And at a point of time, he or she starts feeling, I'm dull, I'm not good. Now, everybody is not born to be Vikram Sarabhai. We need Sachin Tendulkars also. We need Sonal Mansinghs also. We need Amitabh Bachchan also. So we need everywhere people with this or that talent. So when we talk about multidisciplinary or maybe holistic, at that time, first of all, the education should have a huge platter, where for every individual, something is there. When a teacher enters in the class, or I would say rather than teacher, I would say when education enters in the class, the education platter has something for every student, every learner. Now the research says there are 600 plus career options. Now for the 600 plus career options, how many skills do we require? We require huge number of skills. Now, everybody may not have 10 skills, but everybody has set up 2, 3, 4 skills that may make him or her successful in life. Today morning, I was very happy when Saxena ji was talking about education without examination. Now, education without examination is very important, but education should not be without assessment. There is difference between assessment and examination. So there has to be assessment. But unfortunately, yesterday's education assessment system was assessment of learning. The national education policy, when talks about holistic and multidisciplinary education, it talks about assessment for learning. It changes the complete perspective of learning. Learning needs to be assessed, but assessment for learning. It's not off. When it is off, somewhere the direction changes. When an individual is being assessed, the purpose is he or she should move further in the line of learning, in the direction of learning. When we talk about holistic or multidisciplinary education, we again are talking about what Vivekananda said about education, what Gurudev Tagore talked about, what really Aurobindo taught, what Gandhi talked about education. So we are really in practical revisiting those aspects. And my personal experience, I have learned, I have been trained for Kathak, Indian classical dance Kathak, graduation, post-graduation. I was in NCC Navy. I was awarded Chief Minister Scholarship, cadet captain, again, swimming state level champion. I have observed, I'm sure that most of the vice chancellors sitting here, the authorities sitting here would agree that whatever problem today we solve today, have we ever learned as a part of a syllabus? Unfortunately not. But yes, whatever skills we developed during that time, those skills are helpful today. Individual is like a jigsaw puzzle that we used to play while our childhood. The problems of life are like jigsaw puzzle. It's not a piece will solve that problem. We need many pieces to solve that particular puzzle. And I think those set of pieces of that jigsaw puzzle, that is what holistic and multidisciplinary education talks about. Unfortunately, what happens that on very fine morning in higher education, we start talking about originality in research. Today, again, Saxena ji was talking, even the earlier speakers, innovation and ideation, incubation, very good, really good. That talks about originality. When did we teach our students to be original? We have been speaking, necessity is the mother of invention. I'm not a scientist, but yes, I would like to revisit all inventions. Whether it was necessity or it was curiosity and creativity, two mothers of invention. I feel creativity and curiosity are very strong pillars of education. When we will talk about holistic and multidisciplinary education, we will start thinking about creativity, curiosity, enjoying the process of learning. We shall start enjoying it. Now, when we talk about problems, the research should be problem-based. Now, problems, are they any discipline-based? Generally not. The problems are interdisciplinary. Whether we talk about scientific, technical, social science, economical, political, cultural, somewhere they are meeting each other. When they are meeting one another, that means the problems, the life, education, everything has to connect one another. So the dots have to be connected. When we talk about, so since more than 2 decades, we have been talking about UNESCO's learning goals. To learning to do, learning to be, learning to be together. So now when we talk about all these things, learning to live together, learning to know, what are we talking? Are we really, when we study mathematics or science, not connecting it to the other subjects or maybe our real life? Are we really learning to know? Are we really know? And the best part, learning to be, it is not to become. It is not to become, but it is to be. So somewhere I very strongly feel that the education should be holistic, multidisciplinary. optimal means in a class when there are 20 students. One has bent over science, another may have, liking for some performing art. The third one may have for fine arts. The fourth one may have something very strong passion for sports. So somewhere offering an education system that every student gets something of his or her choice and moves in the right direction, really proving himself or herself successfully educated. I think the subject is very wide, so not taking much time. I'm so thankful to AIU and the host university for giving me this an opportunity. And I'll be very happy, being an open university, representing an open university, I would say that more academic councils, maybe UGC, AICT, NEC, everybody, when we start thinking more openly, more holistic and more multidisciplinary education system will be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ami Upadhyay. You stuck to the given time, and it was wonderful to hear about the importance of holistic and multidisciplinary education and its importance, and how our teaching has to be made student-centric rather than teacher-centric. We will have more time to interact with the audience later with Professor Ami Upadhyay. Now let's move to Dr. Jeff King, who is the Executive Director at the Center of Excellence for Transformative Teaching, University of Central Oklahoma. Dr. Jeff King, welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to present for a few minutes and to share a little bit about the concept of transformative learning, which is a beautiful combination, if you will, of holistic and multidisciplinary education. And it also connects with student engagement and faculty development. And so what I'd like to do for just a very few minutes is to share a little bit about the approach that we developed at our university in order to accomplish this. It has turned out to be very successful and certainly has been a great success for, but also faculty as well as for employers because of the kind of education that the students receive. And so with your indulgence, if I can share my screen for just one moment, what I would like to do is provide a few visuals, which I think may be very useful to help understand a little bit better about this approach to transformative teaching learning. If everyone can see my screen, I will try and see if I can move things around. Here we go, in order to launch the slideshow. And this, I think, will be a good way to help everyone understand what we are accomplishing and how it connects very strongly to the concept of holistic education and multidisciplinary education. So as we all know, a different kind of graduate is needed for the 21st century. Graduates now must be capable of solving important challenges, both globally and in the local community. And to do so, graduates must be motivated to contribute immediately to the social good. There are what are termed wicked problems, very difficult challenges to be met and overcome, and the motivation, the internal drive to take those on is important to be developed in university students. So upon graduation, they are eager to begin doing this. So innovative solutions are very definitely needed to move higher education from where we are and where we have been to where we need to go. And so in considering holistic multidisciplinary learning within an optimal learning environment, what I would propose to you is the idea that transformative learning accomplishes that beautifully. Also, in terms of faculty development and student engagement, transformative learning also is an approach in order to accomplish the intended goals. And while I will not spend a great deal of time on what this approach termed transformative learning is, I will simply mention that its foundation was with Dr. Jack Mesereau in the mid-1970s, and it has to this point been very much an approach in adult education, but is now gaining a great deal of traction in the university sector as well. And with apologies to Dr. Mesereau and all the other theorists and researchers and writers and practitioners within transformative learning, I would summarize it by saying, when a learner experiences a disorienting dilemma, she must then try to make sense of her place in connection to this disorientation. In a process of critical self-reflection, she is able to adapt her worldview to accommodate this new dilemma. And in the process, what results is a changed or expanded perspective. So it's an internal change that serves her and the society in which she lives. So what we have done at our university is to operationalize transformative learning in a process that exists in the curriculum and the co-curriculum. It is evidence-based, and it uses a set of rubrics to assess for learning, because as the previous speaker proposed, the difference between assessment of learning and assessment for learning is critical. And in transformative learning, assessment occurs in order to be a formative process to help the learner grow. And so the way we describe transformative learning as we practice it is that it develops students beyond disciplinary skills, and those are those skills that employers say are so needed, but which frequently, almost never, show up on the academic transcript. The ability to work on a team with people who may disagree with you, the ability to lead when the situation demands, to solve ill-formed problems. Those of skills are not necessarily on a transcript that shows your marks in chemistry or engineering or sociology. Also, though, very importantly, transformative learning expands students' perspectives of their relationship to self, others, community, and environment. And also, as the previous speaker pointed out, the ability for humans to function together now is more important than ever in order to solve the challenges that we face. And so at our institution, what our student transformative learning record process does is to develop students in the 5 areas that you see on the right, because our 6 central tenets, as we refer to them, also include discipline knowledge, which is what shows up on the academic transcript. So for many years, we have been working with our stellar Student Transformative Learning Record, STLR. I'll simply say stellar for the acronym from here on. For many years, we've been working Stellar Employer Advisory Board. And those advisory board members are hiring managers and vice presidents of human resources operations at companies representing most of the major workforce sectors in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. In a work session in fall of 2016, they told us if they hired one of our graduates who had achieved at an exemplary level in each of these 5 areas that you see represented here, that graduate should possess at a relatively high skill a list of abilities. So we simply took those lists of abilities for each tenet and laid them out like a metro map, and see on each line of the map are the individual skills that the employers said would need to be possessed by a graduate. And the transfer stations, if you will, happen to be skills that the hiring managers said existed in more than one of our tenet areas. We track our students' development, and our students have said to us that they truly appreciate being able to see their own development and maturation as human beings, because without an intentional process to critically reflect on what learning has meant and how the connection to those beyond discipline areas, to those tenets, impacts their own life, in the absence of that, they would not be able to see the way that the arc of their own development has progressed. And many times in the capstone courses, close before graduation, when students are building a portfolio, which is a common assignment in our capstone courses, they say to us, thank goodness for Stellar, because I will to go back and see what I wrote about my own development, my own thinking in global and cultural competencies when I was a freshman university, compared to how I think now. Some of them have even said, I was almost ashamed to read what I wrote back when I was a freshman because I understand my growth holistically over my time as an undergraduate here. See on the right is a page from a website, which is what student e-portfolios look like, where they tell their own stories. So what we call our stellar snapshot on the left accompanies the academic transcript. The includes the registrar, and it is an official transcript of the university, but it is also a formative instrument for the students, because everything that shows up on the snapshot has been vetted, has been assessed in terms of the student's growth and achievement of levels, and that formative process means students see where they are in terms of their own development, and it becomes assessment for their future learning. We've been absolutely delighted that this kind of student engagement in our stellar process has had very, very positive impacts on student retention. And you can see that here. Basically, all 20% higher retention associates with stellar, students doing stellar, than when they do not engage with stellar. Also, we have been absolutely delighted that for STEM majors, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the retention improvement is even greater. So in summary, what this transformative learning approach does is that it prompts much higher student engagement, correlates with higher student academic achievement, and also associates with higher student retention. But very importantly, it also prompted faculty to reconceive of their role as a teacher. And the prior panelist mentioned the gradual migration from the old way of a purely transmissive kind of teaching to what Montessori proposed, which is much more student-centric. And so faculty in transformative learning go through that understanding and use those teaching approaches. Faculty are much more satisfied, and this is important. They tell us, I am so happy that our university has Stellar, because before Stellar, I always thought I was having a positive impact on my students' growth as human beings, but I couldn't see it. With Stellar critical reflective artifacts, the faculty are able to see in students' own words the impact that their courses and they personally have on their students' development as humans. And finally, faculty have become much more intentional about student learning outcomes and assessment as a part of engaging in the transformative learning approach. So I am very honored to have been provided a period of time to share this idea. We have had Stellar in place for 6 years now, and many other universities and colleges, both in the United States and internationally, have successfully adopted and adapted Stellar. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen, and I appreciate the time to speak with you.
Right, Dr. Jeff King, thank you very much for making a very comprehensive presentation on the importance and the impact of holistic education on our students. Now, when our students go through the layers of education from the school to the university level, what do we want them to become? Would we like them to become curiosity-driven, pleasure-seeking human animals? Or you want them to turn into human beings who are self-aware and who are also aware of their connectedness with people around them and the environment around them, so that we can build sustainable human societies where happiness is all pervading. Dr. Jeff King has beautifully summarized how holistic and transformative teaching can make students good human beings. Dr. Jeff King, once more, many thanks to you for your wonderful presentation. Now we will move on to Dr. Shakila Shamsu. She was earlier with the Ministry of Education. I had the opportunity to meet and interact with her. She has contributed immensely in the field of education. May I now invite Dr. Shakila Shamsu to make her presentation.
Good afternoon, Professor Jagadish Kumarji, and thank you. And thanks also to the Association of Indian Universities, the President of AIU and Secretary General Dr. Pankaj Mittalji, and all the Honorable Vice Chancellors and esteemed guests who are here for the North Zone Vice Chancellors Conference, as much as to the host university, the IP University, the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Mahesha. For me, the NEP journey and the fact that I was associated with the NEP makes me passionate to talk about the title of moving towards a more holistic multidisciplinary education. I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge my fellow speakers, Professor Upadhyay ji and Dr. Jeff King, and I stand enlightened by the words of my previous speakers, particularly the fact that Ami has given a very personalized journey into this whole idea of multidisciplinary education. And Dr. Jeff King's stellar model has really made possibly models for us to think in how we can go towards moving towards multidisciplinary education. Now, the NEP 2020 has been crafted for meeting with the needs of the global knowledge economy and what Ami has already pointed out, the Delors Commission's idea of the multi-dimensional aspects of learning to know, to do, to live together, and to live with others, and learning to be. And also for the fact that we are in a stage of the fourth industrial revolution, where innovative technologies in the field of information and communication technology has driven human intelligences to a challenging area with artificial intelligence and robotics and so on, making us therefore think that the education system needs to empower our youngsters, our students, our youth, with the kind of skills, competencies, and knowledge that would help them meet what are the changing roles or the job roles that are going to come about. In fact, most of us would have heard this common statement that we are not aware of what the jobs of tomorrow are going to look like, and what are the jobs that humans were doing are going to be taken away by the machines. In that scenario, could we have, as members of those involved in formulating a policy, afford to continue with a system which would have made a silo-based knowledge system, and where students do not get what we call the 21st century skills that are required? So with all due appreciation and credence and gratefulness about the fact that independent India had seen two policies earlier of 68 and 86, the 2020 policy which came out in the current century had to be quite different from what it was in the earlier policies. And the discipline-specific education that we offer of students graduating with arts, science, engineering, technology, the agriculture, pharmacy, and seeing knowledge in watertight compartments and not thinking of the porosity of it would have really made us actually making our students ill-equipped for the challenges and for the kind of job roles that we're looking at. So the idea of multidisciplinarity, the idea of the holistic liberal arts education, and the idea that various human capacities need to be integrated together for a holistic development of the individual in terms of multiple capacities that they have, which talks, as the stellar model says, health and wellness, global citizenship qualities, the idea of creativity and cognitive learning, the idea of sports, music, engineering, applied sciences, pure sciences, social sciences, languages, all of them contributing to an entire bouquet of courses, which puts a challenge in our Indian system today, which is very large. And we are very proud of having one of the largest higher education systems with about 1,000 universities and 40,000 colleges and 30,000 standalone institutions and a huge burgeoning student population expected to touch a GER target of about 50% by 2035. But are we providing that kind of education which is multidisciplinary? Now, while Professor Ami has been very kind enough to say that we use the word towards a more holistic education, and therefore having a presumption that we actually have some degree of holistic education, that some degree of holistic education is really at a very, very minimal level, and we really need to transform that. And therefore, the NEP 2020 is not an incremental change, but a totally transformative effort of trying to provide for multidisciplinary education. Now, what does that mean in terms of implementation strategies? Because I think AIU has organized this for our institutions to know how do we move towards that. So you have your own existing departments that are offering arts, science, commerce, or engineering. The IITs would offer the engineering and a few areas of humanities and so on. Then you have your medical colleges, you have your pharmacy institutions, agriculture institutions, most of them being standalone also by nature. How is it that you're going to implement multidisciplinary? Now, it is very difficult to open up new departments all of a sudden, given that we are not a very resource-rich higher education system. When you are having limited resources, you would have to use some degree of open and distance learning also. So even in the policy, we have said that the flexibility comes not just in the kind of disciplinary choices, but the flexibility also comes in being able to integrate technology and to use open and distance learning so as to allow students that kind of freedom to make their curricular choices from a wide range of subjects, including using MOOCs and other kind of courses that are available going fully online. And I think in a certain sense, the whole COVID scenario where UGC went to saying that 40% of the credits could come online has been quite a facilitating thing for institutions to get greater acceptability of using ODL and online education also. So the whole idea is that HEIs can think of, if they are single discipline, then let us think of creating HEI clusters. If they are already having departments which offer a sizable number of disciplines, can they then try into entering into agreements or MOUs so that they can have other institutions offering other disciplines coming together so that as a student, when I join, let us say, IP University, I am not constrained by only the disciplines offered in IP University, but I am given the freedom to take up credits that may be there with IIT Delhi, or I may be given freedom to take up credits offered by Delhi University, because these are all within a certain geographical vicinity which allows me to travel, and where it is very difficult for a student to travel, to take up courses that are there on MOOCs or to take up courses that are offered by the open universities. So we are breaking away not just or the disappearance of the boundaries, we are accepting that holistic development of an individual is a recognition of various capacities that the student has, and in a knowledge economy, you cannot have structured specific discipline learning which might not make students, and mind you, India is at a stage where we are having the youngest population, and therefore you're going to see that, witness that state for almost about 20 years. And if that is the scenario in which we are, can we afford to continue to provide single discipline education? So I think the idea is to move towards that goal of trying either through HEI clusters or by entering into arrangements, institutional arrangements, so that you can offer all disciplines to students to the best ability till institutions themselves could develop all the resources to have various departments, which includes education, social sciences, languages, engineering and technology, including medical education, agriculture, all these could come about in the campus, in one particular campus. Now, the policy says we will have teaching intensive universities and research intensive universities, and we have put forward an idea of MERUs, where we are talking about multidisciplinary education and research universities. So the integration of knowledge is also the integration of teaching and research. It is the integration of not just the curricular subjects, but that undergraduate education should instill and nurture research capabilities in our undergraduate education. Now, within the time limit that I may have, I would really like to take up this idea of optimal learning environments. So for us, we are keeping the student, as Professor Ami and Dr. Jeff King has mentioned, the student is the main stakeholder that we are catering to through the engine of the teachers and the faculty, who would therefore have to reinvent themselves, become more innovative in the way they transact the curricula. They use pedagogies that has greater active learning engagement. You have the kind of assessment patterns that you use, where you are assessing the learning only as Dr. Jeff has mentioned, for understanding the formative evolution of a student and make, the kind of interventions that would be necessary for better learning outcomes. In that whole idea of the curricula, the pedagogy, the assessment, and an active learning engagement, we want to visualize in the multidisciplinary education that all undergraduate programs, irrespective of which area that is being offered into, or which specializations that finally an undergraduate student may be taking under the flexible 3 or 4 year undergraduate program, will have mandatory internships. The disconnect between the world of education and the world of work would call for students to understand what is it that is there outside the cloistered classrooms, or what is there outside the classes within which they exist when they are going to step out into the world of employment. And this disconnect has to come about through a set of internship programs. And it could come for all the disciplines. It could be there for history, economics, sociology, not just for management and engineering or medicine as we visualize it today, but across all the disciplines. And this kind of active student engagement is the one that is going to create the optimal learning environment, where when we say learner-centric, it cannot be just learner-centric. We cannot just assume that there is cognitive learning, there is creativity, there is 21st century skills of collaborative learning, there is 21st century skills of communication. All these skills that go about do not just happen by itself. It happens only when they get involved with projects, they get involved with group-related activities, get involved with topic-centered clubs like debating and sports clubs and eco clubs and activity-based clubs. So in optimal learning environments, the policy has envisaged that we will create all those enabling systems and all those enabling activities which allow for the flowering of various potential and talents of children, which could be in animation, which could be in protecting the environment, sensitizing them to the climate change, sensitizing them to issues that happen around them, the community services that they need to provide, the engagement, the civic engagement that is required, the constitutional values that are important, and the duties that are necessary for a student. Like Professor Jagadesh mentioned, we don't want to create just people who become pleasure-driven, but actually complete human beings who contribute to their individual development, the societal growth, the knowledge economy, and become global citizens, so that they are actually contributing productive individuals. And that has to happen through the educational system. And that is what the NEP 2020 has visualized. Now, in that whole exercise, we are anticipating that there are students who face a lot of financial stress, and therefore there should be scholarships that need to be provided. There are students who may be first-generation learners, and therefore there would need academic counseling. There would be students who face a lot of psychological issues, and therefore we need to provide for psychological and the kind of their psychological well-being and emotional well-being through providing the kind of counseling that is necessary. And at this, recognize, as all of us are in this audience accepting, that every individual, in fact, in the NEP 2020, 22 cardinal principles have been outlined in the chapter on the introduction. And the first principle says that we need to recognize, identify, and nurture the unique potential of every child and provide for his or her holistic development. That has been the cardinal principle for moving towards flexibility in the way we not only just offer choices, the flexibility in the way the curricula is transacted, integrating vocational education, integrating open and distance learning, online courses, allowing for innovations in the way curricula could be transacted, and pedagogical tools and techniques are being employed for meeting with what we call the 21st century needs of our young students. So the whole idea of creating the faculty is the one, and the HEIs will have to do, our own universities will have to create an institutional development plan. We have also told that instrument that can be the way forward for HEIs to move towards holistic multidisciplinary education and creating optimal learning environments by using even technology. And for that, you need to create an institutional development plan, which is a vision and strategic plan of action, assessing what are the gaps and the deficits that an institution has, and remedy that or sort of fill that up in a given time frame, which is like a timeline of a vision plan or a strategic plan of action. Involve the faculty in that. Recognize the autonomy of the faculty in contributing towards this whole exercise of creating the institutional development plan, and recognize that these faculty are the leaders, are the academic leaders of tomorrow, and therefore recognize their significant role so that there is an active involvement, and a faculty just does not walk into a class, takes a session for 45 minutes and walks out thinking that my job is done. No, if that happens, you are not going to provide for holistic multidisciplinary education. So I would just try to end by saying that the NEP 2020 is looking at transforming the higher education system, where each one of us, rather than waiting for directives to come from anywhere outside, do our bit in trying to transform it. Faculty start using innovative ways, students being used to have integrated learning, and the higher education institutions and the leadership and the Honorable Vice Chancellors helping the institutions or guiding the institutions and driving their own institutions to create institutional development plans that can make the NEP 2020 recommendations of creating optimal learning environments as well as holistic multidisciplinary education within a period of planning for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and transforming by 2030 their own institution to become what we call multidisciplinary institutions. I thank you for this opportunity, and I am extremely grateful to my fellow speakers and to AIU and Professor Jagadesh Kumar for giving me this opportunity for speaking to you for about 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila Shamsu. Based on your long experience in education field, you have very rightly emphasized, in fact, re-emphasized on the importance of recognizing the fact that each student has a different potential, and we need to carry out our teaching processes, teaching learning processes, keeping this in our mind, that every child requires a different kind of help. That reminds me of 3 kids who visited a zoo, and they were trying to look at an animal, and between them and the animal there is a fencing wall, and the tallest among them could easily look at the animal because this child is taller than the fencing wall. And then the second child is just about the same height as the fencing wall. So with little effort, she could stretch herself and then look over the fencing wall and look at the animal. But the third child is very short. She could not look at the animal at all. And looking at this situation, the zookeeper, he brought a bench to help the kids. So the bench had certain height. The first kid who was tallest among them, the bench was of no use at all. She could easily see. But the second child could climb over this bench and look at the animal very easily. The third child still could not see over the fencing wall because the bench height is not sufficient at all. All along in our educational policies, when we implemented in our country, we try to provide a kind of a solution that fits everyone. But what is important from this example is that each child requires a stool of a different height. Each child requires a different kind of help in the classroom. It is wonderful to listen to all the three experts who have given different perspectives of the same important issue of the holistic and multidisciplinary education, and creating that optimal learning environment in our classroom and also outside the classroom. So now it is time for us, just as we want to encourage our students to ask more questions and critically think. Here we have very curiosity-driven audience here. They would like to ask some questions. We can use both the modes. Those who would like to type a question in the chat box, you can type the question. I will read out for the experts. Or if you wish to ask a question, you can raise your hand and the host will unmute you. Then you can ask the question.
I have a question for Dr. Jeff King. Yeah, Dr. Jeff, I think you mentioned about your Stellar program, and you did mention about STEM and non-STEM courses. So what's your, experience about Stellar program for STEM based students and non-STEM based students? Where was it more effective in terms of a reach, effectiveness? Whether you see in India we have a two group of students who are going into medicine and engineering. They're slightly different type, and others humanities, and those are different types. So what is your inference from your Stellar, which is a unique transformational assessment system? So yeah, would you like to share?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And I suppose the place to start is that here in the United States, of course, there is a large emphasis on STEM simply because there are so many unfilled positions in the workforce that require a very high level of expertise and knowledge in these areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so from the very outset of our Stellar program, we always had thought that it would be very beneficial for what we call our at-promise students. And those are foundation, low income, underrepresented students. And we've been absolutely delighted to find that the student engagement aspects of Stellar have been very positive for those kinds of students, even to the degree of eliminating the gap, the retention gap between those at-promise students and students not in those populations. But about 3 years ago, we decided to begin tracking as a separate breakout STEM declared majors. And one of the reasons for that is that the National Science Foundation here in the United States has a very robust interest in helping at-promise students stay in the STEM disciplines. And so the first time, that first year when we did that separate breakout in our data analysis, and we saw that the retention increase was even greater than for the student body as a whole. We began to ask ourselves why. What could be something unique to STEM students that might mean that Stellar was having an even greater impact on retention for them. And at least preliminarily, our thinking is at this point that because the difficulty that many students have, especially in the large introductory STEM courses, let's say introductory biology, introductory chemistry, where students very typically struggle in those kinds of gateway courses, the stellar engagement that brings the students together and helps them be more of the university community and, very importantly, with each other. One of the things that our stellar process does is that it not only engages students with the university, but with each other. And so we think that might be one of the things related specifically to STEM is because of the engagement process, especially around those gateway courses in the STEM disciplines.
Thank you.
Right. Any other question?
Sir, may I ask a question?
Please go ahead, sir.
Sir, my question is to Dr. Shakila Shamsu. As we see the education policy, you see that formative learning, and you see 360-degree evaluation, and you see character building, and you see not being, as the chairperson was indicating, a pleasure-seeking animal, but a holistic human being. I mean, all these things look very nice on paper. But you see, a large section of our population look towards education from the point of view of job creation as well. Because you see, we stand at that stage of our developmental process, where you see engaging this large manpower that we have, and young manpower, bubbling manpower. You see, so where is the demand for this multidisciplinary trained person in our economy?
It is true, Dr. Amarpal Singh ji, that we are very myopic in our approach because we think education is equal to employment. And I think we are, as educators, having a role to make our youngsters, and that's why, because here we are only confining ourselves to the higher education recommendations, right from the schooling stage, we are looking at a kind of flexible approach where the hard separations between curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular, which is dominating in our schooling system, is also set to go away, so that we are able to understand that someone who does not perform only in maths or science is not a failure in life, but there are many other capacities that that child is capable of. Now, we fully understand that educational institutions' one main role is to disseminate information and knowledge for the purposes of employment. But as Dr. Jeff has just mentioned to us, with the onset of the internet, the role of a faculty is not just the information dispenser. And that is just available at the fingertips, with the millennium children being so tech savvy that even as we speak in a class as teachers, you will find that they would have gone ahead and searched on the internet sites and gotten information much more than that. But we need to make a society a better society. And just because the condition of a given country is even today saying that we look only for job-related kind of education, I think we as educators, we as educational institutions, we as faculty and academic leaders have a very important role in trying to make them understand How many of us look back at the marks we scored in our 10th and 12th and our graduation to see the kind of roles? Professor Ami was mentioning that. We did so many things. And it is that life skills that we have acquired over a period of time that is holding us in good stead for the roles that we are doing. If that is something that we have had, that same thing needs to be passed on to our students to make them understand that you are not being prepared to become a clerk in a government office, or you're not being prepared to become a bank teller in a bank, or you're not going there for an automotive engineering, a particular kind of a automotive vehicle, because you have reached that level where you are making people only familiar with a very, very narrow scope. And if that technology or that role is changed, then the person is going to look at a very bleak future. So we need to instill in that idea that it is not just the job which is specific. And when you do not even know what that job is going to be, if machines are going to take that over, should you not therefore as educators, it is our role therefore to make them understand, sensitize them to the idea that multidisciplinary knowledge is the way forward. And when a policy is written, when they are visionary documents and aspirational documents, and a policy, as I said, is as good as it is getting implemented. It's not that earlier policies were not good. And we've not been able to implement policies in its entirety that we would like to. And therefore, if we do even our bit, not that make it all multidisciplinary, there have been critics who have been saying, why do you want everything to become multidisciplinary? Let some of them remain as core specializations. It is not our wish. It is the way knowledge is moving forward. It is the way a knowledge economy is looking at the 4th industrial revolution and the 21st century skills. So I think we must make students understand, and once it is coming in from early stages, and the disconnect between our schooling and higher education, that bridging is also taking place, I'm sure there will be a greater acceptability towards moving towards multidisciplinary education. So let's not confine ourselves to the current scenario of jobs and then say that a policy should fit into the current structure. If that is so, then policies are not necessary at all. We just move on the job and try making changes. But policies must be visionary documents, aspirational documents, but at the same time, our pragmatism and our experiences should help us to try and see that we can implement it in the manner that it is desired.
May I ask a question, Professor Jagadesh?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Anu Venugopalan from the Basic Sciences. My question is to everyone, Professor Shakila, Professor King, and Professor Upadhyay. We're really talking about the role of a teacher here as being, at the center of everything. And our experience, at least my experience from decades of teaching in undergraduate, is that what you're saying really resonates with me, that every child is, what Professor Jagdish Kumar also said, every child is special and we should, be sensitive to their needs. But I'm just thinking of our country and the number of people we have here, and the number of teachers we require, trained teachers who are sensitive to all this, it's a staggering number. Professor Jagdish has been at IIT, and he would know that each classroom has like 350 students, and we teach classrooms full of 80, 90 students. How do you get sensitive to each child, and how do you get that many teachers? I think that's a bigger problem. I'd like to hear your views on that.
Dr. Jeff King.
Yes, thank you for that question. And it is a very important one. And speaking from the perspective of transformative learning, I think one very important answer to that question is that when the student himself or herself is actually reflecting on her own learning or his own learning, that the individualization, if you will, that you're speaking about, how can a professor know all 90 students in every class, and that professor may have 4 or 5 classes in one particular semester. So it turns out being hundreds of students. Well, in a transformative education where the students themselves begin to become co-creators of their knowledge and then critically reflect on their knowledge, this individual aspect of understanding themselves, if that is built into the approach so that all students are expected to reflect on their own learning, to understand their own development across time, then the individual aspect of that particular student's hopes and dreams and desires for herself as she moves from university into the workplace, into family life, into her community, there is, because of that individual reflection, the kind of development which, in the absence of students being trained and prompted for that, which typically does not occur in university education, in the absence of that, it would be simply an impossible task for the student, for the teacher to somehow believe she has the individual responsibility to know all 400 students' individual challenges. She can get help in that process because the students share it themselves with her, with the instructor, in their, what we term, reflective artifacts, a written reflection, or some of our faculty prefer the students to provide a PowerPoint in which the student communicates her understanding of herself as a leader, for example. That kind of student-driven contribution to her own education is one very, very important of a transformative approach that we have found quite successful to address the question that you asked specifically.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. King. Any other question?
Can I just supplement, Professor Jagadesh?
Yeah, please go ahead.
And just adding on to what Dr. King has just mentioned, the idea of customized learning as we look at has got to respect a young student of 18 years who is deciding who this government will be, because you're already giving them the right to vote. Let us give them that credence, as he said, of being co-creators in that knowledge, that space that is being created. We unfortunately in our systems do not have a student induction, which we started now. We have a student induction program. We do give them individualized activities by which we try to understand what are the learner competencies. Unless we understand the learner competencies and then build upon that, because each person is at a different level, as Professor Jagadesh mentioned in his anecdotal thing, that there are different levels at which the student stands. Unfortunately, if we walk into a class when at the beginning of an academic year, look at that class of 90 and think that all 90 are clones of each other, and then we go around in our task of trying to say that we are the atlas, we are carrying the entire globe on our shoulder, and it is my job to train them all. That is not the way. We both are active players in a role together, in a role of mentor and mentee, in a role as a guide, as a friend, and because it is a learning exercise, the idea of giving them individualized activities with the kind of individual, let us say, sensitization to their needs is very critical. So I think institutions now need to make faculty, firstly, we are now having the FIP programs, and Professor Jagadesh is aware that I handled a few of them in my role over there for the National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. We have a faculty induction program. UGC is also doing that module. We have student induction programs being brought in. We are trying to see that there is a connect between secondary stage education and higher education system. And then we are trying to use a lot of activities which are individual activities, which are group activities. So when finally over the mid of maybe 3-4 months into the academic year, you have grouping of students for group activities where someone's creativity is very good, someone's presentation skill is very good, so that there is a collaborative activity and each one gets a space to do that. So it doesn't seem impossible. It's a question of actually thinking a little bit out of the box, moving away from our way of structured teaching and moving into the direction of respecting that that student is quite focused. We must accept that the student is focused. The student is a mature person who's making very, very important decisions relating to this world. And therefore, even if he has come into the system or she has come into the system, he is not looking at the graduation as being a fun program. He is or she is ultimately wanting to come out as a successful graduate who can maybe have a life goal of only getting a job, or if he is a person whose ambition was only to learn English, whatever it is. So I think we need to give credence to that fact. And as teachers, accept that they and we are together in this exercise of making a celebration of learning together.
Right. Well said. Any other question? Yes, please go ahead, sir.
I'm Mushtaq Siddiqui. I'm Vice Chancellor from the Islamic University of Science and Technology from Kashmir. My question is basically, it's not a question, but it's a point for discussion that is about the financing of the universities, or higher educational institutions. My worry has been always that most of the state-funded universities do not have sufficient funding for recruitment of the faculty. And we are otherwise also facing very shortage of the faculty, and especially so at the senior level. So NEP is a wonderful document and a wonderful policy, and I have appreciated in my past also the efforts that has been put into this. But while executing the same NEP for our universities in state, especially in state universities, state-funded universities, I'm finding the major problem will be the funding of the universities. Even at this present moment, most of the universities have up to between 50 to 60% of the faculty, which is in permanent positions, and most of the universities are banking upon the contractual faculties. So how do we actually, put a lot of emphasis to the government of India, governments of various states, to fund the universities liberally, so that at least we have a human resource which can execute this NEP more effectively. Maybe Professor Shamsu can, Dr. Shamsu can, also give, because she has been always involved with this NEP 2020. So therefore, she might have thought that time, as a member of that group, maybe where from the funding will come. Thank you.
Right, Dr. Shamsu, please go ahead.
Professor Mukshit, Honorable Vice Chancellor, I would put it like this I think higher education institutions must think in ways, and I'm not saying that the state has to abdicate its responsibility from providing good public education. Neither has the policy said that, nor do I subscribe to that view. Public education system has to be strengthened, and therefore state universities, which get a very meager share of the funding as opposed to what we call as centrally funded institutions, have really a struggle in terms of what is available and what needs to be done. But at the same time, I am of the view that internal revenue generation by higher education institutions needs to be explored in a very, very innovative manner. So the NEP 2020, of course, as terms of a target, we had said that we would reach 6% of the GDP, which has been said in 68 and the 86 policy. And that's the center and the state coming together. Now, in terms of plan priorities, when I used to have an experience of being in the planning commission. In terms of plan priorities, different states, depending upon their developmental stages at which they are, may not necessarily prioritize for the social sector and education, and therefore state universities may not be able to add on to giving greater funds to their higher education institutions. But we must be able, ultimately, where are our students going to? They are going to industry. And I think the way we need to channelize or leverage resources from the industry, who are the beneficiaries of the higher education system, by setting up incubation centers, by trying to, fund some of the outsourced activities where you need in certain disciplines faculty, such as in artificial intelligence or in technology related subjects, who are there as industry experts. So we are visualizing in the NEP that we would have lateral entry for people who come in with industry experience. Now, those packages which come in terms of the pay packages that relate to that, I'm sure there are ways in which we can think of, meeting those recurring expenditure from industry. It can also come in, and that's why the policy has been very articulate about it, in terms of encouraging both philanthropy. Now, as a country, while we talk of all our long cherished values, philanthropy does not seem to be in our system, in our DNA at all. Whereas you are able to do that for many other activities, but can we not do it for a very social good like education? So can we leverage alumni funding? Can we leverage private philanthropy? Can we leverage philanthropy that comes from corporate houses, which you may call it as CSR, but also philanthropic efforts being given by the foundations of huge corporate houses? So I think thinking that the state interminably is going to fund every bit of our public education is also, I think, asking for too much to come, where if hopefully as a country we move towards becoming a 5 trillion economy, then we would hope that health and education would be getting their share of it. But in the absence of actually, and the kind of crisis that we are going, so even in this budget, people said that no, the allocations have come down. But let us say that even in the NEP, there are many non-financial tangible outcomes that can come even if the finances have been limited. I'll stop it at that.
Dr. Shamsu, no, I think we have to close now because our time is only up to 3:30. While thanking all the three experts for their wonderful presentation, I now would like to hand over the mic for conducting the vote of thanks and then conclude the program. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's a matter of pride and privilege to have an interesting and interactive session that is enriched with the strategies to implement National Education Policy 2020. I request the Honorable Chairperson to kindly summarize and conclude the proceedings of the session.
Well, I think the question answer session itself brought out the important points that our speakers spoke about. With those important points that they have made, let us conclude today's program. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of the AIU and the Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University, I extend my sincere thanks to Professor M. Jagadesh Kumar for chairing this session. We are really grateful for the gracious presence of all learned speakers, Professor M. Upadhyay, Dr. Dept, and Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu. I would also like to thank all the delegates for their active participation. We will now take a short comfort break and rejoin at 4. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta, for wonderfully moderating the session. So as Dr. Gupta just announced that we are breaking here for tea and coffee, we'll resume the session back at 4 o'clock and we'll begin with our second technical session for the day on the theme Faculty Development